welcome to this hands-on workshop, The Future of Development. This is what I hope we're all going to be able to complete today. My name is Ricardo Sueiras. You might have been fooled by my name. I'm not Portuguese. My parents are Gallegos. They come from Galicia, and I was born in England, so that's why I speak English. I don't speak Portuguese, unfortunately, so apologies if you thought this was going to be in Portuguese. Apologies. But this is what we're going to be running through today. After a very quick introduction, we're going to spend a small amount of time getting up and ready with the AI coding assistant we're going to be using in this workshop, which is Amazon Q Developer. We're going to look at how to use it. So we'll spend some time going over the options and actually, within a sandbox, trying some of these options out. Before we actually then try and start building an application. So now, quick hands up, who here is already using or tried AI coding assistants? Okay, a few of you. Who here has tried Amazon Q before? No one, okay, good. Right, so if anything then you should all, by the end of today, understand how AI coding assistants work. We'll be using Amazon Q, but a lot of them are very similar. So a lot of the things you'll see today, you'll be able to use with other AI coding assistants. I actually use others as well. I use Ada, I use Zed, I use Cursor, which are other good AI coding assistants. This space is changing all the time and so quickly that it always actually is beneficial for developers to experiment and try new things. So even though you'll be learning about Q, don't be afraid to learn about other things as well, right? Because you know, one week one is on top, the next week something else is on top, and they keep you know, chasing each other for being the best one. So this is what we're going to be covering. Now, the way it's going to work is that I've got a link here. It's a GitHub resource. You can either access the full page or the shortcut. And I will be driving from the front, so I will be doing this workshop with you. You will be following along, and everything, all the instructions are on this GitHub repo. Now, this means that if we don't finish everything today, and there's a good chance we won't finish everything, you can still carry on afterwards, either tomorrow or whenever you want to do that. Okay, this is always going to be open for you to try, or if you like it and you want to share with colleagues, you can share this with your colleagues and they can do this as well. Okay, so I want everyone to get on this page. If you open up a browser to that page, now the Wi-Fi password I was given by the gentleman at the back, so I don't know what he entered it for me, so I don't know what it is. What's the Wi-Fi? Does anyone know what the Wi-Fi is? Right, okay. So whilst you're all getting that page up, I will be using VSCode. So this is really intended for VSCode. If you're not using VSCode, if you're using something like Intellij, you can try and follow along. Most of everything will be similar. It's just that I'll be using some additional VSCode plugins, which we'll be using to see things, and that might make things tricky. Aside from that, well, we'll go into the dependencies in a second, but is everyone on this page? Yeah? Okay, cool. I'm going to come out of here now and get on the page too. Okay, so this is what you should have. So first of all, I've just talked about the dependencies, VSCode, and there are a couple of plugins which we'll be using aside from Amazon Q. The first one is SQLite Viewer, and the other one is Enhanced Markdown Viewer. Don't worry about installing them now. We'll do those when we need them. Now, the fun thing about today's workshop is normally when you do a workshop, you have a set of instructions, and you're guaranteed that if you do the steps correctly, you will get the right outcome. In the wonderful world of generative AI, we don't have that luxury. We are working with non-deterministic systems, which means that when we follow the instructions here, every single person is going to get a completely unique experience. So that poses some challenges when you're trying to run a workshop, okay? So the way we're going to do this is that we will follow a set of steps. You will follow those steps in your own local machine. And within the workshop, every now and then, we will ask you to reset everything, delete everything, and copy the stuff from the workshop so we can all be on the same page. It's the only way at the moment that I can figure out how to actually make this so that everyone can follow along. But it's very, very difficult because we are all going to get very, very different output. Some of you will get everything working, the code working first time and have no errors. Other people will have code and there'll be some significant amount of bug fixing that we'll need to do, okay? So don't panic, that's by design. It's one of the things that you learn when using these tools is that as you embrace AI coding assistants, what you get from them versus what your colleagues get from them is always going to be different. However, what I am going to show you is techniques and tricks to help you get more consistent in getting good output. Because by default, the output you can get is like rolling a dice, okay? And we're gonna load the dice in your favor. Okay. Right. So what we're going to try and do after we install Amazon Q and learn how to use it, we're going to build an application. Okay. The application we're going to build is a customer feedback application, and it's going to have some very, very limited functionality. But I always find that using these tools in actually building something is the best way to understand how they work. So the goal is to actually all get something working before the end of today. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll all be there. Now the way the workshop is set up, there's a number of sections. So I think there's 6 sections. We're going to go through them in turn. Yeah, so that's how we're going to do it. Now the first thing we need to do, even though this is an Amazon Q product, you do not need to have an AWS account to use it, okay? This will work for anyone. I do this workshop with students. What we will be doing is we'll be creating something called a builder ID. And a builder ID is like a login that you create on a website, but the builder ID gives you access to Amazon Q as well as access to other things in AWS, such as skills and training programs, website creation, that kind of thing. So it gives you more than access to Q, but for this workshop, we will all be creating, if you haven't already got one, we will all be creating a builder ID. So what I want you to do is on this page, where it says follow this link, if you can click on that link, and we should be on this page here, setting up and getting started with Amazon Q Developer. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a builder ID. Now, I've already got one, so I'm not going to follow the process, but what I've copied in the actual instructions, what will the flow of what will happen. When you click on this link, and click on the sign and we'll build an ID, you will get a pop-up. And the pop-up will ask you to use an email to register. Now, you can use whichever email you want. You can use a work one or you could use your personal one. I use my personal one, because this build ID will stay with you wherever you go then. It doesn't get tied to your work account. And when I talk to and run this workshop, a lot of people tend to prefer using their personal email address so they can take this with them and it's not tied to their company. But you choose whichever is the right email address for you to use. So this step is you will enter your email address and enter a name. You will then basically be sent an email with a code, and the code will be used to validate the registration. So if you've set up any website that has a verification system, this will look very, very similar. Once you've done that, you will effectively be asked to log in, verify your PIN. It will ask you to create an alias. So this is what you will be effectively reserving your alias. And then once you've done that, you will effectively be logged into your Builder ID. So follow the instructions. If I actually go to the Builder ID page, it should automatically have logged me in. Yeah, so I'm already logged in. But if I log out, this is the experience you'll be going through. So here you would enter your own email address, but because I've already got one, I'm just going to basically use my existing one. So you'll see, once it's finished logging, you'll go back to the screen, this screen, and you should see your name up here on the top. You won't have a picture though, because I've uploaded that. So I'll give you a few minutes to do that. Yeah, it's hard to see the screen at the back, isn't it, I think? I think it's too light in here, maybe. I don't know. Feel free to, if you want to move forward, you can move forward if you want, because, yeah, that might be a good idea, actually. I'll do that. Is that better? No, this one's not closing. That's better. Okay, has everyone managed to get their Builder ID registered and logged in? Put your hand up if you haven't done it yet. Okay, okay, we'll give you a few seconds more then. Whilst we're waiting for you to finish, what we're now going to be doing is going into VSCode. So if you haven't already done so, open up a terminal and create a folder which we're going to be using for the workshop. So I've just called this folder Porto Workshop. And then launch VSCode. If you have VSCode already running, I need you to close it first. Okay, so I'm not sure if that's a problem, but if you have got it running, close it. So, have I got it running here? Nope. And what I want you to do is click on the extensions icon on VSCode on the left-hand side, and then from the search bar, type in Amazon Q. Let me make that maybe bigger. And when you click on that, now I already have it installed, so I don't have an install option, but you will have an install option. And next to it, there'll be an auto update, which will be disabled. Now, normally, I would say don't necessarily enable the auto update, but in this instance, I advise people to enable the auto update. And the reason is that this plugin is being updated on a daily basis as we release new features and improvements. When I wrote this last week, we were on version 1.34, and we're now on version 1.37. Probably next week, we'll probably be on version 1.40 something. So if you have the auto update, it will just update the plugin for you automatically. And all you'll need to do is restart the extension. So it's a much better experience. So once you've installed that, which shouldn't take very long, what you should notice is you have now two things. You have on the bottom of your status bar, Amazon Q, and then you can't see it now because I've expanded my screen, but you have the Amazon Q icon on the left-hand side here. So I'll let everyone catch up on that. And again, in the workshop guide, I walk you through that. Bless you. So put your hands up if you haven't installed the Q plugin yet. Okay, we're all good. Right. Okay, so let me sign out. Sign out. Okay. So normally, your icon should be also this color as well, or depending on the theme you are using on VSCode, it might be a different color. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to log in using the build ID we created. So when we click on this, we can either sign in to get started, or we can click on the icon and we use the use for free builder ID and click on continue. And what will happen is a pop-up will come up. So we click on open. It's going to try and log us in using our build ID. Because we've just created it and we've just logged in, it should automatically log you in to that builder ID. And then what the plugin is going to do is ask you for access to your local data, because it needs to access the files you're working on. So click on allow access, and then you should get this screen, and that's it. And then when we go back, we will see that we have a different screen. Okay. Right. Okay. So has everyone got this up okay, yeah? We're all on this page. Okay, good. So we've signed in, and again, I've put all the screenshots in there in case you want to share this with colleagues and they can follow along. So the first thing we want to do is actually see how we actually access Amazon Q. And as you're using this with your day-to-day tasks, sometimes you need to access Amazon Q options. And the way we do that is we just click on the bottom status bar. And that will bring up the options. We're going to go through those in a moment. If you need to sign out, if you need to log out, normally you wouldn't need to do that, but if you do, then the sign out option is here. We can configure Amazon Q using the open settings. And if we, actually let me make this bigger. If I click on open settings, like a lot of VSCode plugins, we provide options for you to tailor the way that this tool works. So I'll go through these. The first one is show inline code suggestions with code references. Now, Amazon Q, so if I take a step back, AI coding assistants use large language models, foundation models, to get the code suggestions or responses that you enter. These large language models were trained with lots of code. Some of this was, for example, Amazon's code, but some of it also was code from open source projects. Now, for some customers, they don't want to use open source code in their projects. But more importantly that, I spent 20 years doing open source. I'm very passionate about open source. When you use open source in code, you are supposed to provide attribution. So if you use a library or you use a piece of code from a project, you are supposed to say within a notices file, I've used this code, this project in my project. So the question is, how do you do that? Because the large language model might not tell you that. So what Q does, Q was the first AI coding assistant that would actually highlight if it was giving you some code from an open source project, it would tell you the code snippet as well as the open source project. And it would display that in the VS Code. And that means that if you then are building your attribution file, you can just copy and paste it all into your project. So it's really, really useful. And this option turns that on and off. Okay, so normally most people leave this on because they want to use open source code. But if you don't, if in your organization you don't like to do that, you can turn that off here. Amazon telemetry, I tend to turn that off, but don't tell my boss. This sends information as to how well the plugin is performing so that the service team can improve the service to you. But I don't like my machine sending stuff out it doesn't need to send, so I tend to turn that off. The next option is import recommendations for inline code suggestions. Now this, when we're using the AI coding assistant to provide code, sometimes that code is going to need new libraries. And so what this option will do is it will automatically add the import statements for those libraries. Now sometimes that's useful. As a developer we want to do that. Sometimes we think that's going to get in the way. So you can turn that behavior on or off. This one, again, I turn off. It's about sharing and improving the service. Again, I don't like my plugin to be chatty. I want the bandwidth for myself, so I turn that off. The suppress prompts, I'm going to leave this one at the moment because I don't really understand this. This has been recently added, and I still haven't got confirmation from the team as to what this does. So I'm going to park this one for the moment, and I'll update it. I'll update the workshop once it's done. The Amazon Q Workspace Index, you will have yours all unticked at the moment, and leave it unticked for the moment. This is a beta product, okay, but it's a really cool feature. And what it allows you to do is it allows you to use all the files in your VS Code project, and a separate process will index those, almost like a RAG, and then you can use that in prompts within Amazon Q. What this means is that you can start getting suggestions not just on the file you're working on, but on all the files within your project. So it's a really, really cool feature, and we'll see that later on. And the last settings are all to do with optimizing and configuring how the workplace index works. I have a Mac, so these options really aren't applicable to me. So GPU only works on Windows and Linux. but I leave the max size and the threads at defaults. I've never needed to change these in all the work I've been doing. So these are the settings in Amazon Q. Normally, you set them once, and that's it. You leave it. And I've covered all of that in here. Okay, so now we're going to explore getting started with it. So I'm going to look at all the other options here. So the first one, when we go to the Amazon Q settings, the first option is pause auto suggestions currently running. Sounds confusing. What this does is this allows you to configure the behavior of Amazon Q when you're writing code. Let me give you an example. So I'm going to write a file. Auto tech. So you can see that without me having to do anything, in grey, Amazon Q has provided some code in grey, and I haven't accepted it. This is because in the background, it's waiting and constantly auto-suggesting. So I can turn this behavior off, and you can see now the icon has changed. If I now never do demos. Let's try and save this file first. Define average number. And it shouldn't give me any code suggestions this time because I've paused it. And it hasn't, it stopped this time. When you turn that behavior off, you can manually invoke it from the keyboard by doing Command C. Or is it Command I? No, it's Command C. Or Option C, even. On a Mac, it's Option C. On a Windows machine, it's Alt C, I think. But I can now invoke that myself. And this is something that developers will have a preference for. Not everyone wants automatic code suggestions. A lot of developers want it turned off. But other developers like the code being automatically suggested. I tend to leave it on. I don't type quick enough for it to get in the way. So I've already mentioned what the code reference log is. So if I open it, you'll see it comes up on the terminal. And this is where any code suggestions that Amazon Q gives you that are from open source projects, it will list here what the projects are. Now the problem is this is really hard to show you because I can't guarantee that it's going to generate code that's from an open source project. So as much as I would like to try and show you this working, the best I can do is there's a video I think I link to somewhere that actually shows this actually in action, and you'll see what it looks like. You can also access examples, but I would not worry about that. They're pretty basic examples. The next one is Run Project Scan. And one of the, I guess, unique features of Amazon Q is it provides you with a security scanner that kicks off a process for all the projects in your workspace, and then uses 3 different security scanning tools, which I've linked to the actual documentation page. Before I go in details of that, I want to ask everyone a question. You are using an AI coding assistant, okay? It's been trained on all these code. You ask it to write some code for you. It writes some code for you. Put your hand up if you think that code should be secure. Okay, 1, 2, maybe 3, 4, well, kind of a few not sure, right? So this is my opinion. My opinion was definitely, if I'm using this, and in fact, if I'm paying for it, the code had better be secure. So let me set that expectation. The code these AI agents produce is not secure, okay? That's not a problem, okay? But you need to be aware of it because the expectation that a lot of developers have is that it produces better code than I would. It produces more secure code than I would. And that's not the reality. And I've used all the coding assistants and they're all the same. So because the code they produce isn't secure, you need to make sure that you regularly scan the code for security. And this is what this feature does, and we'll explore that in more detail in this workshop. The open chat panel will open up the Amazon Q chat interface like that. Now, it's not necessarily a big issue here because I can access the icon. But in a moment, I'm going to show you a trick which makes Amazon Q much more usable from a developer perspective. And you will use that more because it can hide sometimes. And then I've shown you the settings and the sign out, so that's it. So there are a number of key. I prefer to use the key bindings, the shortcuts, when using Q, and we're going to use a few of these throughout the workshop. The main ones that Amazon Q uses are tab to complete any code suggestions. So when you go from code, so define average number. So if I hit return, it's going to generate some code. Oops, no, I was too quick then. Now it's grey. If I hit tab, it's now accepted the code. Okay, let's undo that. I can also use left and right, and some let's do define get name. And when Amazon Q has got more than one code suggestion, come on, I could do left and right, and it will cycle through different code suggestions, and I can choose the one I prefer by hitting tab. Now, it doesn't always give you multiple versions of code. So if you get some code and you do left and right and nothing changes, it means this is the only code it's going to show you. But that's important to know. So some of these keystrokes you will use more often than others. And then we have the chat interface. So the chat interface by default appears on the left-hand side. Now, the problem I have with this is that if I want to see the files I'm working on, I have to keep doing this. I have to keep going backwards and forwards. And I don't like doing that. It's a click, okay? So what I do is I hold and drag the icon to the right-hand side. And now I can see my files on the left-hand side, and I can see the chat on the right-hand side. And that is much better experience. Now, the, I guess, downside of this is that occasionally if I close everything, I lose the chat window, which means I have to come here and go to Open Chat Panel. So that's just something that you should try and see what you prefer. Some people might prefer it over here, but most people I show this to end up keeping the chat on the right-hand side. Now from the chat interface, we can hit the / key and we get a bunch of things come up. So the first two are Amazon Q agent programs. And what these do is these are actual processes that run in the background, and they will take a task from you and break it down and into smaller tasks and create and generate code. When we're typically using Amazon Q in the chat interface, we can ask it questions, we can ask it to create code, but it's still up for us to copy and paste the code into our projects. When we use /dev, it kicks off a process that varies from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, will reason, will test, and then generate working code which will go straight into your project. However, the use of /dev is limited. So with the free Builder.id accounts you've got, you have, I think, 5 invocations per month. With the professional tier, which is the paid tier, you get 30. So it's not much more. So use it carefully, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Transform, if you are using Java and you have lots of Java 8 code and you want to upgrade it, /transform will take that code and upgrade it to Java 21. So it's really cool. Makes it really, really easy to do that. Help just provides help on how this works. Clear is an interesting one. One of the things I see developers struggle most with using these AI coding tools is they use the chat like a search. What you like, for example, give me some code to do a bubble sort, as you would maybe used to do on Google search. Chat is it's like speaking to one of your colleagues. Okay, it remembers things you've said in the past. It remembers information it's giving you. So when you ask another question, it's going to base the answers on what it's already told you. Now, this is normally very helpful because it means I can go from taking a big problem and start getting narrower and narrower until I get something very specific. But sometimes these AI coding tools, they can sometimes get stuck and they can start giving you an error message, giving you some code to fix an error message, but the code is the same code you already have. Or you give it some code, it generates an error. You ask it to fix that error, it gives you more code, which generates a different error, and it keeps going round in circles. And so sometimes you need to reset the history, reset the conversation, and that's what you use /clear for. And there is, I think, one more. No, that's it here. Yeah. So that's kind of like that's how the chat interface works. Now, within the actual files you're working on, we also have Amazon Q integrated into the menu bar. So you can see here, I can't make this any bigger, unfortunately. It doesn't expand when you expand the screen, it doesn't expand the menus. But you can directly access some of the capabilities from right-clicking Amazon Q and then selecting these. We'll go through these in a second. Actually, we're going to go through them right now, actually. So the explain is pretty nice. What I can do is I can take some code. Let's have a look. Let's take. Let's have a look. I can right-click, click on explain, and you can see that the output of all the menu integrations will put it into the chat interface. And this is now going to explain the code. We see most developers using this if you are spending a lot of time on having to fix code that you didn't create, right? So tech debt, maintenance. Anyone here have to fix other people's bugs? Yeah, it's very common, right? And depending on how well that other developers documented it or documented the code, you may not necessarily know what's going on. Okay, so the explain feature is really useful to try and make sense of code, and you can do it for an entire file or even just for a function. Okay. Nope. Go back. The refactor and optimize are very, very related, but allows you to take code and improve it in different ways. Optimize will allow you to improve the efficiency of the code, whereas refactor will take a look at the code and allow you actually to make other changes within maybe your project file that would actually improve the application. Fix will take a piece of code you selected and send it to the LLM to see if there's or fix any issues that you think that code has got. Now, the code may compile, the code may run, but you may think there's something wrong with it. So you can try it. Now, be careful with this because I found that sometimes this provides, it wants to be helpful. So whatever code you send it to fix, it will find a problem, even if there isn't a problem. So sometimes be careful with that one. The send to prompt is probably the one that I use most, and this allows you to basically send everything into the prompt and then ask a question of it. So I can say, add a doc string to this code, and it's now going to basically provide some code suggestions to do this. Now, one of the things that I think I cover in the workshop, bless you, is that normally, if I look at some of the other things that I've asked it to do, you can see for any code block, I can copy the code into the clipboard, or I can insert at cursor. Now this is fine, but it means it's work for me to do, right? I've got to basically find the place, I've got to highlight it, click on insert code, but it's still better than me doing it at all, right? When we use the menu integration, they've now started to do diffs and apply. So I can view a diff when it works. It's not, okay, so it can't view it, but it will allow me to apply it. So there we go. I'll have to tell there's a bug in that. But it means that it makes it much easier to actually update the code. And the final one is inline, which is probably the one that at the moment I'm using the most. So what this allows you to do, and this is really optimized for the developer experience. So let's just change that. So I can highlight a piece of code, I can do Command I, and I can say add a try catch block. And I haven't had to go to the chat window, and it's entered. I can see I have an accept or a reject, so I hit return, and I've now got my try catch block added. It's the simplest way of making changes to the code without having to go to the chat interface. So if you favor, the command line a way of working, it's definitely the quickest way and most efficient way of invoking Amazon Q and getting code changes. Okay, and then I talked about work-pace indexing and how it works. So I'm not gonna cover this again. We are going to enable it later on. The next thing is around. Should I say how are we doing with time? So I think we are exploring Amazon Q. We are running well behind. But don't worry, we are not going to do this actually. We're not going to do this workshop here, so that's fine. We're okay. It's important we cover these Amazon Q generates logs in VSCode. The way you access them is from the output tab, which is standard on VSCode, and you'll see that there is logs for the standard operation. And when you use the index server also has some logs as well. And the reason why it's important is if things aren't going well, you can view those and you can actually see what's going on and maybe help you identify how to change a prompt or maybe even identify a bug with how it's working. Okay, so I'm not going to kind of complete any more of this section, but there is a lot of information here about context. And when you're using AI coding tools, the number one way to get better at using them is to understand how these tools use context. So rather than me repeat this is like offline reading for you, but it provides lots of hints on how to actually understand how to provide better context to make sure you get better output. And then the final one, which I'm not going to cover again, is Amazon Q is different from other AI coding assistants in that we have these very strong AI guardrails, and these are to protect you from yourself, but also from everyone. And what this means is that sometimes when you're using Q and you're asking it to do things, it's going to say, sorry, I can't respond any further. If I ask it, can you provide me a script to hack AWS, it's going to return this almost certainly. If I ask it to generate some insecure code, it's going to do this. If I ask it to generate secure code, unfortunately, it sometimes does this as well. So this is something that we are working on improving over time. So what I want you to do is at the very bottom of this, we're going to go practicing with Amazon Q Developer. and we're going to try and do a few experiments with this, just to see how this works. So go to section 1 using the inline editor, and what we'll do. Oop, or did I close it? I think I closed. So open up a file. You can call it whatever you want. I've just called this porto-tech. And we're going to basically now use Amazon Q to try and generate some code. Now, from when you're working within a file, I've already shown you the first one, which is function prompt. And function prompts are where Amazon Q will take the function you are creating, and it could, we're working in Python, but it works the same in Java, Go, and lots of other languages. In fact, I was asked which languages does Amazon Q support, and it supports lots of them, including, I wrote a blog post 2 weeks ago. Anyone here used to own a Commodore 64? It was just me. So anyway, my first computer was a Commodore 64, and it had Commodore Basic, but it had assembly language, machine code. And so I asked Amazon Q to generate machine language, and if I go to the bottom, I was able to basically get it to generate machine code to bounce some sprites around the screen, okay, on a 40-year-old computer. So don't think that Amazon Q is just for Python, right? It works across lots of different languages. So if we define a function, what's key is make the description of the function align to what code you want. So in the example here, I put Towers of Hanoi. So if I do Towers of Hanoi, it's now going to start generating some code, hopefully. Hit return. Come on. There we go. Now, if you copied and pasted the code into your IDE, you may not get this. It doesn't like copy and paste. So if I try the same thing again, this doesn't always work consistently, but let me try and copy and paste it. This time it's not generated code. So you do have to unfortunately type. If I type the last character, sometimes it works, doesn't always work. So the first thing to bear in mind is when you're using these tools, they don't necessarily understand the copy and paste as the prompt. So we can get code by defining a function. This is what we call by a function prompt. We can also use the commenting standard for that programming language. So in Java it's // in Python it's hash. So I can do hash function that demonstrates Towers of Hanoi. And it should generate the same code. And again, I can use left and right to do that. Now this is kind of useful because if I keep this in my code, I can keep a track of all the prompts I've used, right? So almost like an audit of all the prompts I've used in my code. So other people can actually then see what I've done. So this is called a comment. And you can have multi-line comments as well. So please follow along as I'm doing this. You try it out and see if it works for you. Is everyone managing to follow okay? Yeah? Okay. But you can also, rather than just doing a comment, you can actually do a prompt within the code. So here, for example, rather than maybe using a prompt in the chat interface, I can say, create a function that will ask a user to enter their name and display hello world. And it's going to do something similar to that, okay? And I can do a multi-line prompt, so I could make that even more, display the message in Portuguese. How do you spell Portuguese? No, Portuguese. And it may even give me some code to do that. Maybe not. Well, it's kind of done it. This is how you can use either function for the function name, single or multi-line comments, and single or multi-line prompts. Inline I've already shown you, so I'm not going to show you that again. Okay. We've walked through the VSCode menu integration. So what we'll do is we'll basically get you to try this as well. So there is in the workshop there's a link to this file. If you right click and open it in a new tab, you will see the code that you saw I had. So if you copy that into the open page you've got, if you can all experiment with the right click just to see what you get and see and experiment with the one that you find most interesting, whether it's the refactor, explain, or optimize. So just spend a few seconds doing that. Okay, has everyone done it at least once? Yeah? Okay. So we're going to now try and run a security scan. So this is quite tricky. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to get some code first of all. So in the workshop, there is a security example. If you click on that, copy the code, and override the code. So you've got basically the code from that security example in your file in your workshop. And it's the only file that's there. And what you can do is start the security scan by clicking on the Amazon queue at the bottom and then run security scan. And what you'll see is on the bottom right, it'll say security scanning project for security issues. Now, this takes a different amount of time depending on how big your project is. There are some limits. I think 200. Is it 200? I think 200 meg maximum source code files is the maximum size. But it can process also thousands of messages. And what it's doing is it's taking the code and then submitting it to the security service. The security scanner is actually going to then fire off. And as we can see here, it's identified one issue. So I can actually now click on show the files that were scanned, or I can ask take me directly to the actual problem. And here we can see that it's identified CWE. If I click on it, it will actually take me directly to the code, and I can hover, and I can view details, I can get an explanation, or I can ask it to fix. Now, the fix doesn't happen very often, right? So if I ask it to fix, you can see it's changed the code now. And once you've changed the code, it says rescan to validate. So I can now try running the scan again. I don't know if this is actually going to fix the problem, but we'll try and see if that fixes the problem. But I wanted to just walk you through the process of how that works. We will be doing this when we build our application in a bit. And now it's found another problem. It's the same problem actually, so it hasn't fixed it. So this is something that happens with these coding tools. They're confident. If anyone was here at the quality testing session, these tools, they're very certain that they know the answer, but quite often when you implement their code, it doesn't always fix the problem. So it's quite often the way to address these is use explain, and on the right-hand side, it will actually now explain in more detail and typically provide you with other code you can use. So I don't want to spend any more time on this, but you kind of like now see how the security scan works. Okay, security scan. Okay. And there are, I mentioned here in the actual workshop, the security scan limits. We've talked about workspace. We'll save this to actually when we start actually building our application. One thing to bear in mind, because this is a beta product, sometimes we need to re-index. And so the way we fix that is we go to settings and we enable and disable the index, and that effectively restarts the index daemon. Okay. Whilst this product is in beta, I do find that sometimes you need to restart that because the indexing has crashed, or it's not generating what the response you expect. And I cover how to do that here. The other common issue is when you run the workspace index, you'll get an error. And so I have covered in the workshop how you recover from those errors by deleting the index files. Because these index files are recreated every single time, you don't lose anything when the index files are deleted. They just get recreated from the projects in your workspace. Now, I've shown you how to use the various tools within Amazon Q to write code for you. But the question that I get asked is, how do you know which is the right tool to use for the job you're doing? And this comes down to a lot of factors, okay? Mainly around how these tools use context to give you the right information out based on the task you're doing. And we can use context to our advantage as a developer. So here I talk about how some of the ways we can actually influence the output. The example I want to give is, imagine I am in here. Let's close. Let's do a /clear. Create some Python code that uses a Python framework. Web framework. Now, it might give me Flask, Django, or Fast API, but it's giving me Flask, which is not unsurprising. If I now add an import statement in my file, okay, so I've got now an import statement. If I repeat the question, if I repeat the prompt, same prompt, it should now know, because I've got an import statement, that it thinks that I want Fast API. And sure enough, now it's given me code for Fast API. So in this section, I've talked about some of the ways that Amazon Q uses these ways to understand what you want. And the way I describe this is, if you're speaking with your colleagues and you are asking about how to solve a problem or write some code, you typically will ask them lots of questions to understand where they're coming from. Because if I asked you, I need you to give me some code to return an API that says hello, you're going to ask me, well, what programming language do you want? what framework are you using? Yeah, what version? Because, you know, the people you're speaking with don't have that context, and AI tools are exactly the same. You have to give them the information in order for them to give you the answer. Okay. Now, a common way, and we're going to use this in the workshop in a minute, is what's called scaffolding, where we provide it a bunch of information, and we hope that the underlying LLM is going to use that information to give us exactly what we want. And hopefully, when we run through the next step, we're going to get that. And there is going to be a situation where when we actually are doing these prompts, that they don't work, right? You might get this is the most common error. I apologize, but your request seems to be outside the domain of my expertise. Now that is typically either because a conversation you've had has timed out. It happened to me. I was working on some code. I left my machine running, went to lunch, came back, and the conversation had gone. Sometimes it's because maybe I just need to change the words I use in the prompt, or sometimes I just need to completely change the prompt as well. So it's not always obvious, and so typically trying these things is what you need to do. One thing I haven't mentioned is that the chat window, when you're using the chat window, you have a maximum of 4,000 characters that you can put in there. Sounds like a lot, but when you've got a big, large file, a code file, that can soon disappear. And the reason why that's important is because Amazon Q's context window is 4,000. So it can only provide back to the back-end service 4,000 tokens of context based on what you want to do. So if you use all that because your file's too big or your information that you're providing is too large, you're not going to get very good output back. So what I tend to do is I tend to refactor my projects so they're structured into smaller components with smaller files, because it can manage more effectively that way. And I think this is what we're going to see is the context windows that the AI coding tools have limits on will dictate a lot of these kind of structures that emerge from code. And bearing in mind that I use Cursor a lot, and Cursor has got no real context limits other than the LLM that you're using, but the kind of the hidden limits are the money, right? So if I'm sending all my code to Cursor through ChatGPT, I'm going to be spending a lot of money, of my money, on those tokens. So it's always something to be thinking about. Okay. I've talked about agents and the limits. I've talked about the code reference. And what I want you to do now is don't click on breaking down problems. Go to the top here and go back to the main page. And we're going to start actually building our application now, which is in building an application to define the data model. So this is the one that we're going to be on, start from now. So the one we're missing out, okay, which I don't think we can do because of the time. I'll quickly go through this because you can still do this on your own. LLMs and coding assistants are not very good when you give them big tasks to do. If I ask Amazon Q, or if I ask Copilot, if I ask Cursor, I want you to build me an application that provides a banking application that allows people to do savings accounts and checkout accounts and all this kind of stuff. It's going to give me very, very bad output. However, if I say I want to create a banking application and define the data model, and then I start breaking it down into smaller chunks, I want to create a savings account and start asking asking it to complete the tasks to do a savings account, then these tools are very useful. So this means that as developers, one of our skills that we're going to have to create and learn how to get good at is how to break down problems into smaller tasks so we can give those small tasks to the AI coding assistant to produce. And so this section is a workshop, very quick, half-an-hour workshop that you can run in your teams to get practice at doing that. But we won't do that here. I want to focus more on the building the application. So what we're going to do, we've kind of already done this. We've created a project, and we're in VSCode. So what I do want to do, though, is I want to delete any files. If you've got any files, just delete them. And close any chat tabs you've got open. So we've got nothing in here. And we're going to create a Python virtual environment. Because, oh no, don't show that again. And then source. So now we've got our virtual Python environment. Obviously, this is good practice. You should be doing this anyway to keep all your Python dependencies in a manageable way. So now we've got that one. We're going to basically do Control-Shift-P. Control-Shift-P. And select the Python interpreter for this virtual environment. The reason why we do that is because we want the linter to not generate errors when we've started installing Python libraries. So now we've got the linter configured to the right Python environment that we've just created in this directory. Now, like many when we're doing real development, we typically will start with the data model first. Okay, we tend to create applications unless we're taking on an application that already exists. And so I mentioned we're going to create a customer survey application. And we're going to use Q to help us define the application model. So what we're going to do is, this is an example of how we might describe the data model for a customer survey application. So if we open up the chat interface, we can copy and paste. Oh, no, that's not it. Let's copy and paste this. And we'll see what Q comes back with. And it's going to be interesting to see if you get the same or different output to me. So surprisingly, this normally never does this. It's given me SQL straight away. Normally it gives me Python. But it'll be interesting if people who have typed that in, what have you got? Have you got SQL code or have you got Python code? Python? SQL? Has everyone got SQL then? Interesting. Very interesting. Okay. So I'm going to leave this for the moment. That's fine. Now, one of the things that I didn't mention is when these tools give you output, they nearly always have a thumbs up and thumbs down. And people normally ignore them. Okay. But don't ignore them, because if you ask a prompt and it's giving you some good output, if you click on the plus, it's going to give positive reinforcement to the context, which means that when you ask follow-on questions, they're going to be more closely aligned with the output. So the feedback loop on these tools is really important for helping you get better context and better output. So don't ignore them. Okay, so and I put a note here, because it's non-deterministic, everyone's going to have very different code. I mean, I'm interested, does everyone's code look similar to this? We've got an answers, a survey response, question options, questions, surveys, users. Does everyone look pretty similar to that? Yeah? Okay. It's not going to be the same, but it's going to be very similar. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you a way how we can influence the output. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder. Now I'm calling it Q Developer. You can call it whatever you want. And within this folder, I'm going to create a file called dev.md. And I'm going to copy the contents of this into this file. So I've now got this file here. And what I'm going to ask you to do is go into your settings, and I want you to now enable the workplace indexing. I had it enabled, but you won't have it enabled, so enable it now. And from the logs, you should see something appear in the logs around a file being added to the vector index. And this just tells us that the file we've created is now in the local index, which we can use. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how you use that. So I'm just going to copy the same prompt, new chat window, and whenever we want to use the indexes or ask any of the files in our project, we hit the ampersand and hit tab, workspace, and then we ask, or repeat the prompt. Now, with the file we created, we've got this thing called dev style. So this is a little hack. If we type in dev style and then we hit the return, what should happen now is the same prompt should, fingers crossed, now give us Python code. Because we've said here that I want code, I'm a Python developer, I'm an expert Python developer, and don't give me anything else other than Python. So let's close this, hit that, and let's see if the demo gods are playing nice with me. And they are. So what we've done is we've influenced how we can get the LLM to provide output for us. Okay, really important. Again, as developers, we need to know we need to be able to master how these tools work for us, not hope that the output they give us is going to work for us, right? Okay. And so what we've just used there, we've just used the feature of the workspace indexing. Now we're going to create another one here. We're going to create one called DBA in the same directory. So now if I show my directory structure, yours should look the same. Nope. Oh, that's right, because what's that? Q AI show directory tree with hidden folders. So one thing I haven't shown you is that when you use Amazon Q, if you've got a Mac or a Linux machine, doesn't work with Windows, unfortunately, you can use Q on the command line. So I've just typed the command here. Let me just expand it. So I put QAI, show directory tree with hidden folders, right? Because I can't remember the tree has got number of command parameters, okay? And what it's doing is it's basically sending this to an LLM that just knows about how to run command line prompts. So basically now it says run this command. I can now, it hasn't actually given me what I wanted though. So that's hang on, because I didn't want, that's better. Okay, so you can see now it's worked, but it's given me all the virtual Python stuff as well. But that's kind of useful to know. I haven't covered it in this workshop, but you can use Q in the command line as well. If you're doing a lot of work on the command line, I'd spend most of my time on the command line. It's very, very handy because you can just do QChat or QAI, say list all my ECS tasks in this cluster, and it will just give you the command. You run it and it's there. You don't have to go and try and find how to form the command anymore, which is really cool. Okay, so we've got this new one called DBA, and what we're going to do is we're going to so I've shown you how to see the files and the logs. We'll look at that, make sure it's still there. Yeah, we can see DBA's there. And now what we'll do is we'll repeat the same thing, do at workspace, and we'll just do DBA this time, DBA. And so this time I expect it to provide SQL code because this is the DBA persona. And sure enough, we've got SQL code for our data model. And this time, there's no text, it's just code. Okay, right, so we're on task 4 now. So what we're going to do is we're going to close these. We're going to create a new folder called data. And in here, a file called customer survey.sql. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some of the limitations, or rather, we're going to show you why you have to think about which tool within Amazon Q you're using. Because I've shown you how to use the command, the inline editor, right? So if I was here, I could do the inline command prompt here, type in the prompt, and it's thinking about it. Now normally, yeah, it's done it here. You see, it's trying to provide code. It's really doing its best. But you can see there's some problems with it, right? So I'm not sure what this EM is here. Okay, doesn't look quite right to me. And it hasn't even finished, right? The reason is that when you're using the AI coding assistance in the actual editor, if you think about it, the latency has to be very, very short. Because the latency needs to be very, very short, because it has to be very responsive, the context window is much smaller. And therefore, the amount of information it's going to take is much less. So if I'm asking to generate a whole bunch of code, then this is not the right tool to use, right? So I wanted to show that, and you can reproduce that yourself. You've just seen me do it. Whether you're doing it in the actual prompt or inline, the tools will tend to fail because the way they're optimized for working. This is optimized for working in the code and doing small code blocks and updates to code. If I want larger amounts of code, I use the chat interface. Because the chat interface, if you think about it, it takes a lot longer to get the response back because there's bigger context windows. The underlying model knows that the developer can tolerate maybe 2 or 3 seconds waiting for that response back, whereas the developer wouldn't tolerate that from within the actual file itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to repeat the prompt. Actually, let's clear this. And we'll copy that into our file. Actually, no, I don't need to do that actually, because what I want you to do is there's code in the actual here. If you click on this button here, it will copy it into the clipboard, and I want you to actually copy that into the. It's probably not going to be might be very similar, but not necessarily the same. Let's have a look how similar this is. User mail, email store. See, I mean, even this has gone a bit funny. User ID, email. So you can see here the output has actually kind of got a bit truncated here. So when you're using these AI tools, trust but verify. Don't always assume the code they produce is going to be sanitized. Okay, but don't worry, we're not going to use the code from the chat. I just wanted to show you how it worked. We're going to use the code from here, and we're going to save this file. So now we've got our SQL, which is our data model. In the next task, what we're going to do is we're going to basically take this code and show you how context works. So one of the key things of how all the AI coding tools work is that they tend to have a preference for the file that's currently open in the IDE. So I'm going to leave the customer survey SQL open a new chat window, and I'm going to enter this prompt in the chat window. And because I've got the customer survey SQL file open in VSCode, when I hit return, it's going to use that in defining the Python code that gets generated. And we'll see here that it looks very close. If you see the Python code for users, it's identical to the data model we've got in SQL. Okay, so again, I've been able to get Q to generate this code because I'm influencing it by having the file open. This is context. Okay, and you should try the same thing. You should have try the same prompt, and you should get exactly this. So in this instance, we should. I'm going to hope that everyone has the same output, right, as what you see here. If you don't, let me know. Put your hand up if you don't, because it should work this way. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a file called app.py, and we're going to basically copy this into okay. And then what we're going to do is with this file open, we're going to ask another question. What Python libraries do I need to install this code? Now, I pretty much know, because I've known these libraries, but if you're new to some libraries, you might not know what you have to install. So you can use Q to tell you, and here it's now giving me a whole bunch of commands to run. So I'm going to copy that. And that should disappear in a second. It's gone. So that's it. So that's the only one I needed. I can now try and run this. This is the fun part. This is when it's probably not going to work. It did work. Okay, right. So now this is where it's going to be useful to install a new plugin. So in your VS Code plugin, there is a plugin called SQLite Viewer. This one here, which is what I linked in the separate guide. If you install that, it's really useful, because when you're running a local SQLite database, I can click on it and I can now see my my database. So you can see this Python code has actually created the structure, but it's also created some test data in there as well. Now your code might be different. Okay, the code you created might be different. The code you created might not run. It might generate an error. So if you tried it and it's generating error, put your hand up. I know you're all good. We're still working. Okay, cool. So we won't do this, but I just want to show you how this can be useful. When you're in the early parts of your project and you're still trying to figure out how to what the data model is, you may get a request from the business saying, oh, we need to add a new field to the data model, and they give you some new SQL commands. Okay, you can still make updates. So in task 3, we won't do task 3, but task 3 shows you how you can still make changes to SQL and then make the corresponding changes, or get Q to give you the corresponding changes in your Python code. And that's tasks 3 and 4. But we won't do that for time, because otherwise we're not going to get our application running. Okay, so yeah, so in section 4, I actually provide the code that was working for me, but we won't need. I don't think we need to do that at the moment. No. Okay. So, task 6. Okay. This is where we're going to install another plugin, which is the Markdown Preview. Okay. So if you quickly install that, it doesn't take very long to install. One of the nice features, okay, about these LLMs is it allows us to do things quickly that we don't typically do, or hate doing. So in this instance, I might want, for example, to document this data model. So I can put a prompt like this: create a mermaid diagram of the SQL code that I can display in a Markdown doc. And let's see what kind of output that provides. And we can see it's actually generating now the mermaid syntax. And I can then basically follow this by saying, add the Markdown to display this. And I'm going to actually create a file called customer survey.markdown. And I'm going to basically copy this all into it once it's finished. Insert cursor. Right. Now, hopefully, if this has worked, I can right-click, open with the Markdown Enhanced Viewer, and we should have. Oh no, we don't have it because this is something that happens. I think that's. Is that right? Yeah, let's try that. We now have a mermaid diagram that documents our data model. Okay. Now we can actually do it the other way around. We can start with a data model in mermaid format, or even in XML format or UML format, and we can ask Q to generate the SQL code for that, which is really useful, right? Because you might have no source code for an application, but you might have some documentation, and you can now generate the code from the documentation. So super cool, super useful, and this is useful as additional context for when we ask it to build application code. So typically, when in the data directory, I will have my schema, I will have documentation in there, so that when we ask agents to start building software that works with this, it's going to have the context it needs. Okay. We won't do task 7, but task 7, right, is shows you how you can use Q to change different formats. So I can sometimes I work with teams that they don't want SQL code. They want you to provide the information as YAML, and they'll generate the SQL from that. So I can ask Q to take the SQL and convert it to YAML, and it will do that for me, and vice versa. Sometimes, as a developer, I might have YAML from my infrastructure as code team, and I want to use that myself locally, so I can convert it into SQL. Again, I'm not going to do task. Should we do task 8? No, we won't do task 8 because it's going to take too long. So task 8. So now that we've got, the database or a local database up and running that shows how to run the SQL, quite often as a developer, you might want to generate some test data, right? So, and again, in the session this morning about application quality and how Gen AI can help that, I think this is a really useful use case for Gen AI. So, if I, in the chat window, keeping the customer SQL survey open, I can ask it to generate some code that gives me 100 records, and I've now got 100 surveys in my data. Or I can ask it to create a Python code in a new conversation window. Again, keeping the customer survey SQL open, I can ask it to generate some code, and it will typically use the Faker directory, but it's picked up the fact that I've got a database called Customer Survey DB, and it will generate a script that will put 100 records in the actual database. Really useful if you just need to do some quick testing to make sure that your application looks okay. And here's some code basically that it created for me, which you could run, but for the purposes of time, we're not gonna do that. Task 9 is we will do, because I think this is probably the number one for me killer use case for developers and AI coding assistants. SQL as a language is quite mature, it's quite stable. There are different dialects, so Oracle, MS SQL, Postgres. They all have slightly different versions of SQL they support. Some have got their own features. But the large language models pretty much know how to create SQL that is dialect specific. And if you want to write queries, so we want to create this customer survey application, we've got our data model, right? We can now ask, how would I write a SQL? How would I write a query that might, for example, be how to see how many total surveys or submissions? And without actually having the database up and running, I can open a chat window. It's going to read SQL. It understands the database schema, and it's now going to tell me how to generate some queries. And here we are. And that was super quick, right? You can imagine that even for complex schemas. So there's a very well-known one, which is the New York Taxi schema, which a lot of people use when they're doing data analytics like benchmarks and testing. I ran it on that. I asked some questions in English, and it generated the SQL. So you can use these tools to very easily create SQL for your applications, which are really cool. And there is, again, some code here that shows you how to how this would be implemented in some code if you wanted to test those queries out on your test data. Okay, so I think we've done enough on data models, so I want you to all go to the bottom of the page and click on part 2. And before we continue, close all the chat windows. We don't want to carry on any of that conversation. And we're going to delete the app. I think we can delete the app.py. Yeah, we're going to delete the app.py and the customer survey DB. If you were following along, I'm going to delete those. So we only have the data directory and the Q developer. So we're going to start building. So now we've got our data model. Okay, we've got a good foundation on which to build our application. Now, I talked about project scaffolding, and it's a way of influencing the output you get. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a folder called project. And within it's not important what the file's called. I'm going to call it project standards. It's a markdown document. And then I'm going to copy this into this folder. I don't need Docker file, so I'm going to get rid of the Docker file. I'm not going to do tests. I don't need health check. But I do want my root file to be app.py. So you can change it as and what you want. But this is my standard. You could change it. You can have a whole bunch of these documents. But I want the output of Q to reflect this when it's building me some software. And again, we're using the fact that this file is going to be used as context and scaffold the code that the AI agent is going to create for us. So now what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the Amazon Q agent for software development. So we do /, we type in dev, and we press space. And you'll notice that it goes from being light to being dark, but please do not hit return, because we don't want to use any of our invocations. We're then going to basically copy and paste this prompt. And what this prompt is it says, using the customer survey SQL file for reference, so using our data model, create a Python web application using Flask that will create a customer feedback application. The application will allow users to register and then log in. Once logged in, users will be able to create surveys. The application will also provide the URI that would allow people accessing the application to provide feedback on a specific survey. So it's pretty basic, right? That's how we might ask to do a core application. So I'm going to paste that in and hit return. So I want everyone to do this, okay? And what you will see, hopefully, is it will say, okay, I'll generate code for that. This might take a few minutes. It's going to take between 6 and 10 minutes to do this. So now is a good time to go and get a coffee or go for a stretch your legs for 5 minutes while it's doing this. But before you go, let me explain what's going to happen. It's going to generate some code, but what it's doing is it's taking the prompt that we had and it's breaking it down into tasks. And the agent is going to start executing these tasks, writing some code, testing it, and then moving on to the second task. And it's going to start telling us what it's doing here. It's going to tell us what files it's reviewed, what files it's creating, what files it's changing and deleted, as well as providing a running commentary of each step, what it's doing. And this is what it's going to do over the next 5 to 10 minutes. It's very hard to predict how long this takes, but we can already see now that the first thing is the problem statement asks for building a Flask web application for customer feedback. We can see that it's reviewed our data model and it's reviewed our scaffold, which is good because now hopefully it means that when it produces code, it's going to be in the structure that we want. So, is everyone got this up and running on their screen? Yeah? No? Not yet. Okay, it will come soon. So you can start seeing now that we've got models. So we've got models have started being created. So now is a good time to go and stretch your legs and get a drink if you want, because it's going to take about 5 minutes before, 5 to 10 minutes before this finishes. So the summary, we can see that it's reviewed 2 files and it's created 15. But importantly, it has kept the structure I wanted. So it's got a templates directory, it's got a roots directory, it's got a models directory. When I've run the same prompt without the scaffold, you get complete random output. Sometimes it creates templates, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it creates roots, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it just wants to create everything in the app.py file. So this is a better way. If you have your own standards when you're writing software, it's a better way of managing that. Now, when it finishes the code, you can actually click on the code and review. And I always suggest to people review the code, not necessarily to check to make sure it's 100% correct, but just to make sure that it looks okay. And this is kind of what I expect, although it looks like the main route is, oh no, the main route's actually here, so that's fine. I can look at the models and dot, okay, interesting. Survey, db. So in it, okay, so where's the db gone? That must be in the app. Yep, db. So it's got the roots for registering and logging in. It's got the survey roots. And then we've got all the HTML as well. So it looks okay without being it's impossible to know for sure. So what I'm going to do is I will accept the changes, but sometimes when you're reviewing it, there might be some files missing. Or for example, it might if it hadn't have followed the structure, okay, I might want it to do it again. But because we've only got a limited number of uses for this feature, what you can do is you can use this button here, provide feedback and regenerate. And what this does is it effectively gives you like 3 lives. Okay, you can use the same invocation of the /dev, and it will redo it, but with a different prompt. And it's useful because this means that even though you only have 5 invocations for when you're using the free builder ID, if the first time you try a prompt and it doesn't work very well, you can still retry that prompt 3 more times until you get something that's worthwhile. In this instance, it looks okay, so I'm going to basically accept all the code changes. And my project now is looking pretty good, right? I've got everything in how I want it. But it's obviously it's using a lot more libraries now, so I'm going to basically ask workspace which Python do I need to install? Because I'm being lazy, I could try and figure that out, but I'm going to basically just ask it to tell me what I need to do. So I'm going to just do that. And where's the one? Okay. Now, I'm almost certain, so let's go back to the workshop. So you've gone through this, and install the libraries, and we're now here. It's almost certainly not going to work, right? So just to set expectations, we'll try it. Okay, and this is what I expected. It always happens when you set up. When you ask Amazon Q to generate programs in a particular structure, because these LLMs aren't particularly smart, they don't actually understand the fact that you're creating this structure, and they're just repeating from memory code that they understand works. So here it says attempted relative import beyond top level package, which is what I expected because it didn't look right in the models here. We've got import, which is not right. That should be, we should have another class in here that abstracts the DB. So I'm going to show how you can use Q to help you fix these problems. Because when we're developing, we often have these issues, right? We're using a library we've never used before. We run it. It comes up with an error. We need help, right? And normally we've gone to Stack Overflow and got lost in the Stack Overflow soup. So what I do is I take the error, and it's important to actually start to get good at knowing which parts of the error to copy and which parts of the error to ignore. So I then ask, when I run the application, it generates this error. And I copy that. And what will happen is, because it understands the code, actually I've got that, yeah. It's going to now try and understand it and provide me with some fixes. So here we go. So it's given me a whole bunch of options here. So the first one, I'm not sure if I like this one. This is a common issue with Python package imports. There are a few ways to fix it. Use absolute ports instead of relative ones. So here, it's made up this workshop.db. There is no such thing as a workshop.db. So that's not right. Restructure my project. So I could restructure my project, but I don't really want to do that. Why has it got workshop there? That's strange. Or run the application properly, which is not right. So this isn't particularly good, but it's because I have probably had this survey up and running here. So let's try again. And this time I'm going to use workspace, so it can view all the files in the project. I'm going to paste the error and see if it gives me something different this time. Okay. So this is looking better. So it's asking me to create a database.py file. But that's not going to work. Where's the init file? Yeah. So this is not even providing me with the right information here either. So this can get very frustrating. Let's have a look. Yeah, this is not right either. So again, our job is to review this and not actually use the code exactly as it gives us right. And sometimes it's trial and error. Let's try something different. Okay. How do I restructure the code so that I avoid the error? Yeah, so I don't want that either. So to make things simple, I have got working code here. Models. And what it should have done, it should have asked me to create this file here and this file. Actually, that's okay. And then it hasn't done it here for some reason. Where is this one here? database. Yeah. Let's try one more time. Okay, this time I'm going to change the error just to this one here. And I'm going to open the, this one here. I'm just going to say, how do I fix that's better. Okay. So now I'm going to create in the models directory. Create that there. From and now let's try running the program. What did I miss? What did I miss? That looks okay. That looks okay. Ah. Okay. Why does it work that? Okay, so let's have a look. Why is it generating an error now? Models. Okay, let's see what. Okay. When running the app, it generates extensions. Okay. So same. So that's actually from. That's not right. That won't work. Maybe it is actually. Let's app from models database import DB. And now let's try running it. Oh, that's because that should be dot. That should be dot. This has got me stumped. Not sure why it's not doing that. From models. Okay. So that's that. From extensions, models. That's yeah, that's okay. That's right. PY. Right. Well, I'm not sure why it's not working, but it's not loading the application for some reason. DB DNAP. That looks okay. Update routes. user DB. Auth from models. Oh, okay. We need to change that. From models. User. From database import DB. Okay. Oh, same thing here. Survey. Okay, now it works. So this is quite normal when the code is generated. There's a lot of code that you get. This is the kind of the downside of using these coding agents to create code for you. So there's not. I mean, it's maybe what 100 lines of code, but because it's been generated by someone else, you have to figure out how to fix it and get it running. So it'll be interesting to see if this works. Let's see if this actually works. And this is the application that we get with it. Not bad. I mean, I had to spend a little bit of time debugging it, but as you saw, this is not like I've not pulled any. This is real live code, right? But normally, what happens when it does it? If I click on register, it normally will fail because again, what you're doing is there we go. I didn't expect anything other than this. The process of going through this is that you'll get to a certain stage, you'll fix the code, and then you'll need to kind of work through and fix every single bug that comes along. So rather than do that, what I'm going to show you, so let's have a look, go back to the here. I've got Porto. No, Porto. Q. So this is what I did this morning with this code. And that's because it's being run. So this is code that was run this morning. You see, it looks slightly different because the code is generate a completely different session. But this one I can actually log in and register. So if I log in here, what? Let's register. Registration successful. Okay, so now I've actually registered and logged in. No surveys. I can create a survey. Yes, no, And now I can complete survey. Yes. My surveys, I can view surveys. You can see the kind of like the sort of thing, and I can log out, and there we go. So that's the code. That's the code that if you follow all the troubleshooting issues, then you get to that code. So I'm just conscious of time. I want to make sure that if there's anything else that we need to cover. So I followed trying to run the code here. When you had it on your machine, when you accepted the code, were you able to run the application? Golang code. Oh, okay, cool. And how did it do? Oh, okay. So so you didn't want to use a SQLite. Yeah, yeah. So if you need a Postgres image, um, uh, so interestingly, I normally have done this workshop before with a local running Postgres container, but I had so many people having problems getting Docker running locally with Postgres, I stopped doing it. But if you want a good Docker compose file, then where is it? This one here. Yeah, I think it's this one. No, it's not that one. Student. Oh no, actually that one probably okay. Nope. Where is it? Yeah, this is a very simple one which I use, and that works great. And that allows you to have Postgres running locally with it's 15.16, which is a good version with that password. So if you want to use that, that would help you get it up and running. I have a little start script and stop script. Although I don't use Docker, I use Finch, which is like an open source alternative to Docker. Because on Macs you have to pay for. You've got a Windows or Linux machine, I'm assuming. So sorry, which one? Oh, Colina. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I tried that, didn't get on with it. So I then tried Rancher, didn't get on with that, and Finch, because Finch is a command line tool, so it works better for me. Okay. So I need this. I do need to fix this actually. So let's try and fix this problem. With this new with the new version of the code. Sorry, let's actually come on. Yeah. So whilst this allows me to run, it fails when registering. So when you're using these tools to help you troubleshoot, it's important to provide the context in the chat. So I say, when I register a user, it generates this error. So whenever you're providing information, always tell the AI coding assistant what you're doing when you get the error, because it doesn't know, right? So I'm going to copy this. Actually, I should close that. Close all this. Actually, I'm going to rerun this because I didn't have the right thing. In a new chat window. Okay. Oh, okay. It's because I've got multiple. You should only use one Alchemy instance, which makes sense. second annotation. Yeah. Keep only the debug. I think that's okay. Sorry? Sorry, there. A podcast. Sorry. Quota. There is, yes, but so in the workshop I provide a link to it. So I'll show you what it is. Amazon Q. You've reached your quota. But so yeah, you only get 5 if you're using /dev. You only get 5. So 5, just 5, but everything else is fine. So don't. So this is why. So you shouldn't use /dev unless you really, really need to use it. So the way I explain it is that if you want to bootstrap a project, right? You've created your data model, and you've got everything set up properly, then it's a really good use of using /dev. But if I'm going to use /dev just to write just one file, no, don't do that. That's a waste, right? So because the amount of resources that it takes to run an agent is significant, which is why it's quoted. I'll show you the pricing page. I'll show you the. So this is the. So the builder ID is the one on the left-hand side, $19 on the right-hand side. You can see that you have a 5 per month for the /dev. You have also some other limitations as well. Most of the times you don't actually run into these problems, but if you begin to use it heavily, what I find is as I have become addicted to these tools and use them all the time now, I have subscriptions to Cursor, to OpenAI, and I get this for free. So I have 3 I use, right? And I'm thinking about getting a new subscription to Continue as well, which is another one. So I think the way I justify it is that for any month, they easily save me 2, 3, 4 days work. So for me, it's like $20 is nothing, right? It's what $20 is lunch, right, in a restaurant. For me, so for me, that's why I justify the price to me. I would pay them. I would pay the money anyway. I get more value out of this than I do from my Netflix subscription. Okay, so let's see if that. You were already. Oh, you were already using it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So that's that. So in the workshop, I provide all the details. So yeah, you can get it from that. So let's try if this is now fixed. This problem. So I'll show you. So from within the chat, okay, the 2 you've got to be careful with is /dev, right? Be very careful with that, and /transform, right? Because those are the ones that you have very, very limited quota. At workspace, no problem. You can run it all you want, okay? Because you're running locally. You're running everything on the local index task. And then it sends it like the chat. So basically, it's used like a chat interaction. Yeah, so so I find that in the past when I use /dev, most of the /dev I don't need to use anymore. I can just use at workspace instead. Yeah, it's much, much better in that respect. Let's see if it will let me register a user now. So that is not Amazon Q Developer. That's Bedrock, Amazon Bedrock. That does all the image generation. So that you use Amazon Bedrock, which I can show you. I can show you that. Let me log into Amazon quickly. What the hell? What's going on? Okay. Bedrock. So this is Bedrock. I'm running it in the US, and here I've got access to all the foundational models. I've got an image, playground, or a chat. So if, for example, if I select a model and I select stability AI, draw a pixel art picture that shows Porto in Portugal. And it's now going to take, it takes between 10 seconds, well, that's what it thinks, that's what Titan thinks, sorry, Stability thinks Portugal, right? Okay, and you have the same thing for chat. So basically, these are equivalent to ChatGPT, Sonnet, that kind of thing. In fact, these are the models that you can use. Where are the models, base models, there we go. So these are all the different models. That's actually, do a line. So these are all the different models you can use in Bedrock. Some of these are text, some of these are chat, some of these are multimodal, so they do both. But it's different to Amazon Q. Amazon Q uses Amazon Bedrock, but it has other models which are, which we don't talk about much. But it's still using Bedrock under the covers. You don't see it. That's all hidden from you. It's a service. So the Amazon Q service uses Bedrock, but you're not accessing Bedrock directly. You're accessing the Amazon Q service. Yeah. So I followed the message, and I now have registered my user, and I can now create a survey. So we could try the same one on this one. Yes, no. And we can actually now take, let's have a look, share link. Yes. Return to home. Dashboard. View results, and we can see results. And that's all. I mean, we've only been here, a little while, and that's a pretty good application to begin with from there. But we're not finished yet, because one of the things this application doesn't have, in fact, when we're building applications, one of the things we might want to do is start adding new features to it. So in task 11, what we're going to ask this to do is actually update the code. I'm going to close all the chat windows. We're gonna ask it to see if we can export the data, right? So we might have some survey data, and this is where I use that workspace rather than that /dev. I would use at workspace. So let's just do that and see what we get. So I've asked it to do the prompt, but this is not very clear how to implement this. So I think I'm going to retry the same prompt. I'm going to give it some feedback saying that I didn't like that feedback, and workspace. And the reason why I do the thumbs down is because it means that it's not going to provide the same feedback again to me next time. Oh, it has done the same code this time. Interesting. So I can add which route do I need to make this code change to? Okay, so that's going to be surveys, the route surveys. So I'm going to add this code to here. Oop. And now I'm going to add this function at the bottom. Change the HTML, survey results. Try running the application again. And view results. Okay, did not export survey with value server ID. Generate survey CSV. Where did I put that? Okay, that's here. So let's change that. Let's try and see if that fixed it. No. Okay, so we've now got an export function, but when I click on it, it generates more errors. And so this is what happens when you're using these coding tools, is that you'll get some code and you'll run it, it generates an error, and then you input that error into another prompt, it generates more code. And so you get to a situation where sometimes you need to think about, do I need to start from the beginning, stop the code, or do I need to continue? And this is where there's a trade-off between how much time you can lose debugging code that these tools generate versus you writing the code from scratch. So have you managed to get your Go code working now? Not yet. And now, just with a couple of these follow-up prompts, we've added a new capability in the application to export a survey. So it's a combination of, first of all, starting with the right prompt, running it, trying it, generating the error, making sure that you tell Amazon Q what generated the error, and making sure you've got the right code open so that when the chat is thinking about it, it's got the file open. Now, what you have to understand is that where the code you think is the bug, you need to have that open, and that's something you as a developer needs to know, right? So this is why I say that these AI coding tools are not really going to be very helpful for people who don't know how to code. You'd still need to understand how these applications work. So our job's to stay, at least for the moment. So Amazon Q only has a 4,000 token, so it's very low. When you consider that Cursor has 200,000, right? So that's correct. So it's from what I understand, 4,000 is the total context sent back to the service. And so what Amazon Q does, it tries to figure out what is the most important 4,000 tokens to help you with your problem. So what can happen? So a good example, sometimes I will be stuck with a code, and I will go into Bedrock. I will select Anthropic, Claude, Sonnet 3.42. Yeah, let's do that. So I will be stuck, and I mean, it hasn't happened for a while because the models and queues getting better all the time. But maybe 4 or 5 months ago, I was building an application with someone, and we kept going around in circles. And so what I did is I took all the code and I put it in here, right? Because the limits here, I think it's 200,000. Is it? I can't remember what the actual limits are on this. Sorry? What, here? No, that's it does that in it does it here, but it's even changed there. It used to have it. Oh, hang on, here it goes. Maximum length here. Oh, so even here is only 4,096. Interesting. Oh no, that's out. Is that output? Okay. I mean, I think this must be a limit to the UI here, because you can. Yeah, that's definitely a limit in the UI. Let's have a look on. Let's change model. Single prompt. Let's try Anthropic Sonnet V1. Yeah, it's only 4,000 here as well. That's low. Sorry? Yeah, I mean, this is an artificial maximum because it's obviously in the UI. If I wanted to go and do this through the API, I could then control how many tokens. So normally when I've used Sonnet, I've set, for example, the max token size to 200,000, or actually not 200,000, 20,000, because obviously I want to manage cost. I did a blog post on. Let's have a look. On actually no, it's on community.s. On interacting with the Hack and Use API. So where is it? Where is it? I thought I was. Oh, yeah, here we go. And in the code that's here, because I mean, I'm taking in all the comments from a Hack and Use thread, and that's like tens of thousands of characters. So where is it? In the code somewhere. Do I set the context maximum? You know what? I don't think I do. I don't think I set the code maximum. Oh, maybe do it here actually. Actually, 4,000 here as well. So I only set it to 4,000 in here in my code. Interesting. Oh no, that's the response. That's only the response. I get 4,000 back. That's different, because all models have got a limit on the response coming back, right? And that is limited, but the actual response going in normally is much bigger. The max tokens you can use. Yeah, there's it's not huge. It's not huge. Yeah, and we have an internal conversation all the time to try and figure out how that's going to change over time. Yeah. So just following on from the workshop, just to make sure that because we're just closing up now, because yeah, I think we're due to finish at 6 o'clock, but if you guys want to head off before, that's fine. The rest of I'll just walk you through the rest of the workshop so you can basically use it to help you, figure out how to do this. But the kind of the path, once we've got the application up and running, the workshop works you through adding some additional capabilities, right? So we've just added this export button, and exports the stuff. If I go to command, cd downloads, there we go, cat pineapple on pizza CV. We have some output, but it's not very useful. So the rest of it then basically says to change the code so that basically it includes all survey details and responses. And then basically, then we add an API basically to export it in JSON format in case you want to programmatically or do it for our machine. So the thing I'm trying to get across is that when you're using these tools, is you can use /dev to build your core, right? Spend some time making sure that's solid and you understand the code, and then start using at workspace or the inline to add new features that way, rather than expecting it to do everything in one go. And you'll get much more success that way than if you try and do everything in one go, and it will probably, well, my experience has been it doesn't normally do a very good job. Then there's another piece of functionality, adding a share link, and I think that's the last one, I think. Oh no, there's more. Oh yeah, then there's adding an about page, and then we go to the last piece, the last part of the workshop, which uses or does a project security scan. So now we've got some code. We did a very simple example of what that looks like, right? But what does it look like with code that's produced? And we'll normally see a whole bunch of CWEs come out, right? So do that. Then we look at how you can actually use Q to do something which is quite nice. Imagine that you, for example, are an open source developer or want to open source your project. These tools can actually help you with the guidance of how to do that. They can tell you how to add things like SPDX headers, generate a license file for you, all that kind of stuff. And then the last one is then documentation, how you can actually use Q to then generate documentation for the project. And here I talk about understanding the trade-offs before, whether you want to do everything by yourself. So this is not a very big project. So I could go in and I could basically do add doc strings to this file, right? I could do that, but I'm going to have to do that to every single file, right? It's not going to take me long, but it will take me longer than if I maybe use /dev, right? But if I use /dev, that's one of my quota. So which one? And so I always say, think about it in how much time and effort it's going to save you. If you've got a big project that you've been given, you might have maybe 2,000-3,000 files, right? Maybe using /dev is a good example, a good way of doing it, right? Because it will do everything for you. Whereas if you've got only a project here with like maybe 20 or 30 files, I will do this manually, right? Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I think what will happen, okay, is that not just Q but the other ones as well, because I use Composer as well, and Composer I think is more consistent than /dev, but I think QDev is going to get better over time. We've got a lot of really brilliant engineers working on it, and so I get to see things that maybe other people don't, and it's it's definitely going in the right direction. So I'm excited. I'm excited. Yeah. Yeah. I think knowing how to control it as well, right? Just by using a simple scaffold file, markdown document, allows you to provide that enough control that it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. If you think about projects that we use in the training data, there's good code and there's bad code, right? The good code tends to come from projects that's structured well. So if you provide a good structure, then it's more likely going to choose the code from that structure than just random. So the more information you can give it, the better. Yeah, yeah. And I think that's actually the last bit of the workshop. So there is a lot, and so normally people don't finish it, but I wanted to just going to go through all those last bits. Um, so I hope that you've learned a little bit. It's hard to keep everyone's attention for 3 hours, so I understand that. But we do it because we want to make sure that everyone at least has the opportunity to try it. And I'm very interested to see if you succeed with your Go, because I wasn't expecting someone to write Go, which is really cool. Actually, it's really cool. Okay. Oh, it was. Okay. So do you think it in the last 2 hours, do you think it's created code to a level that's okay for you to use and build upon, or do you think, or would you prefer just start yourself from scratch and build a project from scratch? Oh yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. So there's a couple of things, right? So when I did this morning, I initially had wanted to put tests in, because tests you should really do at the beginning, right? You shouldn't do them afterwards. Um, and I think I'm going to redo this to try and factor that in, because you have to be very, very careful, like you say. If your project isn't quite 100%, and then you try and put the tests afterwards, it just doesn't work very well. So I think in a way, you can almost like, you can become too invested in the code you've created already, and you don't want to change, which is dangerous, right? You don't have control anymore. So yeah, I think I understand that. Okay, cool. Right, well that's it. I think you're free to go. Um, there's as there's three of you, you can have these lovely Amazon Q stickers um, for lasting the 2.5 hours.